So Frank, you're a wildlife biologist, and I've got a burning question for you. Rabbits.
Rabbits.
I get these people that call me and they're like, I am passionate about rabbits.
Yeah.
And I understand being passionate about different wildlife species. Everybody's got their species. What do I plant for my rabbits? Like in a habitat, what do I plant? Surely native plants, rabbits, they go together.
Yeah.
What do I need?
Well, I think there's probably 3 components to think about for if you're going to be managing hardcore for rabbits. Some kind of a grassy cover, so that provides cover, that provides overhead protection, but it also provides places where they can dig a shallow nest, right, and have their babies in.
Okay.
So some kind of grassy cover. But grass isn't going to feed them for very long. The tender shoots and things like that, but it soon is going to get too big and too tough, right?
Right, rabbits pretty small.
Yeah, and they're very small. So you need some kind of food source. What I'm thinking there is forbs. Forbs are our top food source. So they eat the stems. They also eat the tender leaves. So you've got to have that food source. You can't just have a place where they're raised, but then after they're fledged from the nest, so to speak, then they have nothing to eat. So you need those legumes, those native legumes, to sort of take the place of that clover, which they like. So those native legumes are good. Native forbs with their tender leaves and stems are really good, really juicy stems and tender. And then some kind of, if you're going to be doing this and thinking about this on a whole life cycle basis, some kind of a shrubby cover that provides overhead protection that's dense enough that they can dive into it, but that coyotes can't continue, or bobcats can't continue to pursue them when they're in the cover, and certainly hawks can't get to them from above. So some kind of shrubby cover. So this black raspberry right behind you is a great example of this. And really, this is a great example of a matrix of rabbit habitat right here close together. So you've got native grasses that provide cover and places for them to put a nest. You've got lots of forbs scattered throughout that they're going to be able to feed on. And then if they need to run away and really have a hardcore cover where they can escape, especially in the winter, but not only in the summer, they can get in there. Plus, if we have a heavy snowstorm, if we have a period of ice or whatever that's kind of prolonged, they can get in there and be really safe and really warm and really protected, but still have lots of food right along the edge where they can jump out, get a bite, and jump back in. So we want all these habitats sort of in close proximity to each other, because rabbits aren't really known as having the hugest of home ranges, right? Maybe like a white-tailed deer. So you really need to have all of those habitat components in a very close proximity to each other.
Yeah. So, okay, we've got, you're saying have the habitat components, which is the grasses for the shelter, for getting in under, for having our nest in under. Have the forbs and legumes, native forbs and legumes, that's our food component.
Right.
Have our hard cover. So when I often have people that are, when they're doing wildlife, or rabbits specifically, they're thinking about Blackwell switchgrass. And I think that, so switchgrass being one of the native warm season grasses, of course, and the Blackwell is one of the shorter varieties, so it all depends on soils, but it doesn't get, this tall, it stays this tall. So I can see where that would serve a function as being both a nesting site, a cover site, to some degree, maybe a little bit of the black raspberry function over here, the like hard cover. But I can see where you kind of need a thick stand of it for some things, but then at the same time, there's no food. So it's like you want your thick stand of Blackwell or any other, of these grasses. The switchgrass stands really well through the winter, so that's probably another big benefit of it. I can see where you want these switchgrass clumps. You need a nice thick clump for some of these functions if you're going to use it as that habitat. But then you also need like the food components right there next to it, so that we don't have to, we're eating our food here, but then we have to run half a mile over here to get to our cover when the predator comes by. That doesn't work.
Right. Yeah, that's really important, is having those cover types interspersed. Rabbits are pretty vulnerable. They're known to have a short, pretty short lifespan. They're pretty vulnerable. They tend to be lower on the on the food chain, right? So they reproduce quickly because they tend to have lower adult survival rates. But we can take steps to increase that survival as long as we can, and that's by putting these habitat components in very close interspersion. So if you have your grasses where they're having cover and where they're nesting, where they can just jump out and grab a bite of food, jump back in. When things get really tough, they can run over here and jump in a thicket. You know, that is what you need. Really close proximity to these food sources. Just think about it on a smaller scale, because you're thinking about a rabbit, you know, instead of a deer. They tend to use really the same types of habitats in terms of what they're feeding on, what they're hiding in, things like that. It's just on a smaller scale. So really think about, when you're thinking about designing your planting, think about having a really good interspersion of all these habitat types.
Yeah, yeah. So, and how thick do I want the plants? You know, with a lot of other wildlife species, we think about, we want runways and whatever between it so they don't have to get wet and in the dewy morning and whatever. How thick do we want that?
Well, you know, I think we tend to think about and maybe make our rabbit habitat too thick.
Okay.
Because if you think about it, when they've just fledged out of a nest, they're still pretty small, and they still have small legs, and it's hard for them to get through really thick grass, really thick woody cover or shrubby cover, lots of vines and stuff. It's hard for them to get through that. And they need a place where they can get dry, you know, when there's a heavy dew or there's a rain. So, you know, I tend to want my rabbit habitat maybe a little thicker than my quail habitat, but I don't want it too thick to impede movement of these critters and to decrease survival by them getting hung up or them getting wet, not being able to get dry. So you need those sunny places. You need those places where the sun's hitting the ground so they can get warm. That also invites forage production in those places, extra food sources. So think about that. Don't think it's so thick that you can't walk through it. You need to be able to, these rabbits need to be able to move through these covers very well.
So I can think of a couple ways, and I'm going to hit you up with this thought, couple ways to achieve that thinner stand. One would be to plant a thinner stand, and the other would be through grazing. Is that right?
Yeah, plant a thinner stand on the front end, or if you have the ability and your stand's a little thicker, come in and graze it. I think grazing is a fine habitat or rabbit habitat management technique. I know that when I'm quail hunting, I like to quail hunt in grazed grasslands because I find more quail there. Yeah. Guess what? I also find more rabbits there too. They tend to go hand in hand. So grazing is a really important tool for really creating that open space that not only rabbits can use, but a host of other critters.
Yeah, yeah. So if people are thinking about planting with rabbits in mind, it sounds like the important things are to have cover and to have food and to have them intermixed.
Yes.
Where you've got both of them right there next door to each other.
Yeah, next door to each other.
Native grasses and the native wildflowers, and if you can get some shrubby cover involved, that's another big benefit.
That's another benefit. That's just going to increase your overwinter survival for sure.
Okay. I'm Elizabeth with Hamilton Native Outpost, and this is Frank Loncarich with the Missouri Department of Conservation. Frank is a wildlife biologist with a wealth of information about different critters on the landscape and what they like, what they need. And it turns out native plants are good for wildlife. Native wildlife and native plants go hand in hand.